Fantastic.
Hey, this is Mark Smith from Digital Roughneck, and I am here with Jeffrey Can from Digital Oil and Gas. I'm super excited about that, which I'll explain why. And for those who haven't checked out Digital Oil and Gas, I will show you what it kind of looks like when you, actually, no, let's make this bigger screen here. Yeah. So he's got this Digital Oil and Gas. Tell me what somebody gets when they sign up for this podcast, Jeffrey.
Well, the podcast is produced every week. It includes 3 different kinds of content. So content number 1 is an interview with some sort of industry leader who's in the industry of supplying digital innovation into oil and gas on either customer side, i.e. it's an oil industry person who's buying, or a technology startup or a technology company who are selling. And what it does is you can see 2 sides of the industry through that kind of interview podcast. Second style is I write a weekly article series that I publish on my blog site, and I narrate those articles they come out as little 10 or 12 minute long things for you to you can listen to. Very, very, very short form, but very punchy. There's about 180, 190 of them now on the.
Wow.
So it explores all kinds of topics. Oh, yeah. There's 15 alone just on different use cases for blockchain. There's lots on artificial intelligence and impact of digital on the midstream, on the downstream, what pipelines are worried about. Here's what the digital oil field looks like in the future. All kinds of content. And the third kind is when I am retained by someone to deliver a presentation to them, I'll often record my remarks, and then I will pair that up with put that in on the podcast as a narration, and then I'll also turn that into an MP4 file and put that up on YouTube so you can hear see the slides and effectively listen to the podcast at the same time.
Okay, great. So I am going to ask you a little bit more, but first I just want to say thanks to our sponsor, Clean Connect, cameras and AI solution for energy. And, one of the things that I want to, well, first of all, let's get a little bit into your background, because clearly when I hear you talk, you've got a ton of experience in oil and gas. How did you get into oil and gas?
A simple story. I was graduating from McGill University in 1984. Now, if you're for an audience of a certain age, might remember what was going on in 1984, but it was a crisis in the oil industry at that time. And but I was hired by Imperial Oil in Toronto.
Okay.
Imperial Oil is a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, and that's how I got into the industry. Imperial Oil politely told me after 3 years, look, without the engineering degree, you can't be supervising any of our industrial assets. And while we like you, the reality is your career is kind of limited. And so I said, okay. And so I left, went and did my MBA in London, Ontario at one of Canada's great business schools, and then joined at the time Touche Ross, which became Deloitte. And I stayed at Deloitte for almost 30 years, worked around the world. Including tours of duty in Hong Kong, all over mainland China. Then spent 16 years in Calgary, 6 years working for the Irving organization in St. John, New Brunswick, and a complete overhaul of the oil business there. And then 4 years in Australia, where I led Deloitte's LNG industry consulting program. So we were trying to support the growth of the LNG sector. And so through all that, I worked there, as you can imagine, upstream, midstream, downstream, pipelines, did work for the Ports Authority in Vancouver around how to sort through crude oil exports through the pipeline program there, and time in oil sands and in unconventional basins, and spent a year in a fracking unit, spent a year with a drilling company. So I got to see the industry from all these different dimensions. That's what led to the.
So what prompted you to start the Digital Oil and Gas podcast and kind of niche down in that space?
Well, it came about when I was in Australia. I noticed when I was there that the Australian economy was extremely digital and well advanced ahead of Canada. And yet the oil industry was very much like what I experienced in Canada and the United States, which was not very digital at all. And as I was watching it, it occurred to me the innovations that other industries were experiencing would absolutely have to come to oil and gas. It was just a matter of time.
Hmm.
That's what got me into thinking about, well, what would the future look like with a more digitized industry, and which parts of the industry would experience change fastest, and what kind of change would be experienced. And if you wanted to win in a in a digital industry in oil and gas, what would you be doing so that you came out ahead? So that's what pulled me into it. And I got, as my, happens, you get deeper and deeper into these things, you discover you've opened up a very, very big question.
Well, exactly. Right. Well, my background is IT, and I was a media guy. So I started a magazine called Windows NT Magazine back in the day.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And it was big. I had, there's about 1.5 million kind of unique people that would visit the website. We had 657,000 people reading in various language editions of the thing. So it was a big deal. We rode the Microsoft wave as Windows NT went from nothing to like 70% and they're now the dominant player, right? We all know that. But there was a time when they had 0% market share in the enterprise. So that goes way back. Anyway, I rode that wave, sold that magazine, but have stayed involved in media and stuff since then, and started a podcast called IoT Playbook for Channel Pro, and I speak there. So it's real IT and managed service provider focus. But a friend of mine, David Connolly, he ended up talking about oil and gas, and in particular, a regulation, SB 181, coming up in Colorado. And he said, man, how are we going to do real-time methane leak detection? I said, well, cameras and AI. And he's like,
exactly.
Well, how does that work? And so little by little, I got sucked in, and then we started a company to kind of focus on that. But as we're looking at it, and I'm trying to, Dave and I are the perfect complement of OT, operational technologies, got years of experience on oil and gas pads, upstream, and me, IT guy, trying to marry these two things together. And there are a group of people that we work with that I think are what I would call, what we started to share as the, digital roughneck. Okay. And I started putting this down, and I think I shared this with you too, where, okay, some part automation, which they're doing like with SCADA and Total Flow and PLCs, and then deal with regulations. How do I deal with this? SB 181 or regulations and EPA type stuff. And then of course, everything on a pad, mechanical design, how does it all work? And now this, one of the newer skill sets about cameras and AI and networking and intelligent edge and cybersecurity, the things that are more traditional in IT. But even quite frankly, I do teach classes to IT managed service providers. Cameras and AI, intelligent edge, those are new to them too. So this is new to both IT and OT people. And then you came back and said, well, hey, don't forget the data. Data's like everywhere, and it's all siloed. So anyway, I ended up signing up for your Udemy class, and which you promoted on one of your episodes. And I went there, started taking it, going through. And what I was fascinated by, Jeffrey, was your was your framework. So I'll show a picture. This is the actual Udemy class, and this is just one of the lessons. You get all kinds of lessons. It's really well laid out, by the way. I'm complimenting you. It's very well laid out, thought out. Like, here's the framework, and then you walk through each part of that. So I thought, hey, since I got you here, you can actually walk through some of these things, because I agree with all this stuff. And some people who are watching this may think, well, wait, when is an upstream, guy going to be involved with some of this stuff? Well, I can tell you right now, if you have any pad that's been developed in the last 10 years, you've got industrial IoT all over it, right? And it's connected into their SCADA system, which for a lot of people is their sort of point of truth. But they may go into AI going, well, I don't have any AI yet. At least they're not aware of it yet. And of course, my company dealing with cameras and AI, this is a big part of what we do. But talk about some of this other stuff like robots, because I may think of, the actual, robotic arms that are, putting in, and I imagine there will be actual industrial robots. But what did you mean by, kind of walk us through this whole framework and kind of set the stage?
Sure. So it's not you can see it as you stare at the framework, but you can see this word data in really, really big
Right.
letters.
There you go.
So
Yeah. This is the big
yeah,
thing across all of it, data. Yeah.
exactly. It's and the reason you could make data very, very small and thin, but my view is that if you look at the stock market valuations of the modern data rich companies,
Right.
that's their stock market valuations are now enormous, and the world has now recognized, capital markets in particular, that data is actually as valuable as much of what it is that companies otherwise produce. So if oil and gas produces molecules, carbon, hydrogen, we ultimately put it into plastics, or we put it into fuel. The data that this industry generates is almost equally valuable. I used to remind people there's not a single petroleum engineer who actually goes down the wellbore to look at the reservoir and count the molecules. We manage this business entirely on the data we have about those assets, because the products themselves are toxic and hazardous and you don't want to be exposed to it. So data is incredibly important to this industry. And that's why I made it such a big layer.
Right. And yeah. Okay. So keep going.
I was going to say that the reason why Internet of Things starts at the left is because the IoT world is expanding so rapidly, because chips are getting so much cheaper and they're so much more capable, and they're generating all kinds of data and new data. So in your case, if you think about visual data, that's not something that oil and gas would have paid any attention to 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Because the Internet of Things that we would have used or still use on a well site, for instance, or at in the downstream at a gas station for measuring product movement, will be a sensor for volume measurement or temperature or pressure, mm-hmm. but not visual. So the Internet of Things is driving more and more and more data. And because it's growing exponentially, the volume of data is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
I know in the MSP world, they were getting kind of excited where, they evolved from, I would call, break fix people, right? They put in servers and laptops, and it was all about hardware sales. Then they moved to this managed service provider, and they're like, little by little, it's all about the cloud. And now, and for some of them, they miss that hardware component a little bit. I said, well, guess what? Get ready for IoT, baby, because all that hardware is coming back.
It's all coming back.
And it's all in the Wild West right now, because a lot of the IoT that's out there wasn't managed the same way you manage the standards of IT, right? Mm-hmm. So I think this real marriage of the OT guys, operational technology, putting in IoT, measuring, as you said, sensors and everything on a pad, and now IT coming in saying, yeah, but are there standards around this? Is there a standard way of getting this data? Like, how do we manage this at scale? Those two worlds are coming together. And then what I'm finding too is, as soon as you get IoT, then it goes to the next thing, artificial intelligence. One of our applications is putting a camera on all the sensitive parts on a pad, like, separators and stuff, and looking for a leak. Now, imagine if I did the way this typical surveillance thing where you stare at a screen waiting for a leak to happen. That's like saying, I want to pay you to watch paint dry. No, nobody wants to do that. But you need somebody or something to stare at that screen 24/7, never taking a break. And that is artificial intelligence. Those machine algorithms are staring at that, or looking at tank level monitoring, or looking at, did someone cross a virtual barrier into a pad, or all these things we want them to look at, but not have a human being stare at the screen.
Quite right. And my point here is that if you look at an oil and gas company from 10 years ago, the tool of choice for administering and managing all of that data and reporting on it and sifting your way through it and interpreting it and analyzing and so forth is Excel. It's Microsoft Excel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but with data growing in such enormous quantities and at such pace, it's growing exponentially. IBM estimates that we recorded more data onto computers between the years 2016 and 2017 than we had recorded on all computers prior to that period, just within that 2-year period. So the volume of data is going like this. Excel is not the answer to process it and sift through it and analyze it. And that's why artificial intelligence and machine learning is second part of this puzzle. So if the Internet of Things generates the data, then we need something to interpret the data. And that's the role of AI and machine learning. And I put that the AI is in the way I use the framework. AI is a catch-all for a whole range of technologies that we would use to sift through data and interpret it differently, including machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, all kinds of stuff. And then the third piece is once the machines have interpreted the data, then you hand it to a robot or something that can operate autonomously, and then you say, now you act on the interpretation of that data. You do the work, and that's the role of the robot. But it could be an edge computer, it could be a controller, it could be anything that operates with some level of autonomy.
Right. Okay. So in our case, where you have a machine model that says, "Hey, I found a leak," you send an alert through their SCADA system, and then the SCADA system says, "I got this alert. Go. This is a bad alert. So go shut down the pad or partial shutdown, or notify the operator to go do something." So it could be a human, but it could actually be totally automated.
Totally automated. In case of a camera facility, for instance, that's detecting a leak, you could potentially send an alert to a human to say, "Hey, heads up, I'm detecting a plume here, which is unexpected." Or you could send an instruction to another machine to say, "Hey, we don't know what this condition is, but we don't like it. It's outside of our set points for acceptability. Shut that process off." And so the machines can start to drive more and more of that decision making. And the way I see the world is the combination of the data, the devices, the algorithms, and the autonomousness. This is where you create your signature way of doing business, because every business is subtly unique, some combination of assets and interest and capability and business model. And so that center layer, which is in those four components, is what I call the signature ways of doing business. And you combine and recombine these things ad infinitum across different parts of the business to create your secret sauce, your way of being distinctive in the marketplace.
So then talk about the foundation underneath that, those three areas there.
So the reason cloud is directly underneath it is because it is now very clear, at least, and not always to oil and gas professionals, but if you're outside of oil and gas, the place where you're going to store all of this data, where you'll be able to access machine algorithms that are available to you in a rental model or a services model, and even where some robotic processes will exist, will be up in the cloud. Mm-hmm. And so cloud computing becomes the foundation on which much of this will actually sit. And so that's why it's right underneath it.
So, and that could mean Azure, AWS, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Or
whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. Doesn't matter. And then beneath that is blockchain. And the reason blockchain, this is very subtle for most people in the industry are still struggling to understand where blockchain will go. But what we're going to need is the ability to trust what that Internet of Things device generated. How do you know it hasn't been tampered with or hacked with? There's already evidence that cyber criminals will quite happily hack into a device and change the data coming off of that device for their own nefarious purposes. So we need a way to establish that we trust that device. And we need a way to establish that the data coming off the device hasn't been hacked from the point it leaves the device and makes its way over to the interpretation engine, the artificial intelligence engine. That's going to be the role of blockchain. And it'll create the conditions where we can have high trust in the data and all the devices that are at work in this new structured environment, including the robots. For instance, if you imagine we send a drone up to go carry out some task, like survey a landscape where we or run a perimeter check of a fenced-in controlled area like a gas plant. How do we know the robot actually did the job? We need a trusted way of absolutely capturing the data immutably that no one can tamper with, so that you now have the evidence chain that says, yes, that robot went and did the job. And where are you going to put that? Blockchain.
So when I think of blockchain, I think of like smart contracts. So for example, I would imagine upstream selling to midstream, there's this transfer of, energy to this group. Now I'm going to record that and that transaction in a blockchain that now it's a secure would that be an example of something like that?
So that's one example. Another example, or a mnemonic that I really, really admire is from a university professor in Toronto by the name of William Mugayar, and he uses the word atomic as his way of thinking about blockchain. A is for asset, T is for trust, O is ownership, M is money, I is identity, and C is contract. And his model is if you are in a business process of some kind that touches one or several of those elements, assets, trust, identity, money, contracts, you may have the foundation for a novel business solution that uses blockchain. And so in the case of smart contracts is a great example. I've two product is just you have custodial transfer of control or ownership from party to party along a chain, where you say it's going from a gas plant or a liquids plant to a pipeline to a tank farm to a trucker to a tank. It's changed hands all along the line, all the way down the line. You could use a smart contracting model to do things like track it from and trace it all the way through that chain. And every time you need a financial event to take place, i.e., I've taken title and I need to pay the supplier, then you use smart contracts to execute that financial transaction.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, I mean, in the case of upstream, it could be, pumper truck shows up, gets liquid. There's a transaction there. It goes into the blockchain, and okay, fascinating. And then ERP. What?
So this is the reality of oil and gas is that certain things that we think about, paying people and employees on salary, that data is largely managed today in enterprise technologies. And this is where the world of our cyber tools sit, and where SAP sits and Maximo sits. And these technologies themselves are becoming digital too.
Right.
They're going into the cloud. They're being made available to run on any device, anytime, anywhere. They're becoming elements that you would interact with a robot or create new business models. They're not going out and they're not going away, but they themselves are becoming digital. And so I included them in the framework to remind people this is not an either or situation where you go, oh, well, my enterprise guys, they don't have to be involved in my digital world. Yes, they do. My OT guys, well, they don't have to be involved in this. Oh, no, yes, they do. And the digital guys, they your team that understands digital also need to be involved. And that's the reason why I included the enterprise answer was the classic information technology people who help run the back office and all that stuff absolutely play a critical role in delivery of a digital future for oil and gas.
And so then going up above the middle layer, talk about those two.
So I talk about them last, but I put them first on the chart on the framework. There are two laws in digital. They're empirical laws, not really sort of real laws and physical laws, but they are Moore's law and Metcalfe's law. Now we all know about Moore's law. Moore's law says that over time, the density of transistors on a chip's double, and at the same time, its cost of manufacturing is cut in half. And that's roughly every 18 months or so. Metcalfe's law is founded by a chap named Robert Metcalfe. And his law says that the value of a network is related to the square of the number of nodes on the network. So in the world or land of digital, people who specialize in digital innovations in Silicon Valley, they're working extremely hard to exploit those two laws. And those two laws mean you have to move fast, really fast, to build your network. And you plan for Moore's law to drive your costs down and your capability up every 18 months. We don't use these two laws in oil and gas. They just don't exist. We don't even think about them. But if oil and gas is going to actually stay on top of and abreast of what's going on in the land of digital, it has to embrace these two empirical laws. Now, how do you do that? You adopt methods like Agile, which change how you do things in oil and gas so that you start to maintain your work pace and your development pace and your pace of innovation to marry up properly with Moore and Metcalfe. That means thinking about the user and the user experience, because if you don't have a great user experience, you can't get the scaling and tick-up effect. So that's why Agile and user experience are right there. It's ways of working have to be adopted so that digital can actually work correctly. And then, of course, above that is you're changing people's jobs We need a different talent model for a digital world because people need to be trained on digital. They have to have that sort of foundation.
Right.
So people and change management becomes the table stakes here. The companies that win at digital are the ones that figure out the talent and the people change piece, because much of what's down below you can buy. But if you want to be really good at digital, you got to be digital. In being digital means you have to think differently about talent and you have to do work differently. And the winners in this industry in oil and gas are the ones that figure that equation out and figure out how do I accelerate my pace of change to match what digital is actually able to achieve.
I was thinking about, when I was at TMAG, we would evaluate new certifications that would come up, like, Microsoft certified engineer or whatever. And we would literally send a survey out and we could determine, hey, if you got this certification, you could get $14,400 more, right. And people are like, oh my gosh, it created a flood of people getting certified. And indeed, that first wave did, immediately become more valuable, and therefore they made more money. I agree with you. I mean, some people are looking at this idea of a digital roughneck, right? The different skill sets, some of these things. Quite frankly, there's one guy on our team that he's got this equal mix of OT and IT skills. He is the most valuable guy. We put a hedge of protection around it because this guy, he could go out and he can fix some part on a pad, and we outsource to other producers, but he can also set up the camera and network it and make sure it's secure and hook it to the internet and all this dual skill set. And he is the most valuable guy. He really is today. So anybody listening, watching this, go, wait a second, because the way I talk about the digital roughneck is a guy who takes pride in the fact of how many pads he can manage remotely, not how many miles he can put on his truck.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
Because at the end of the day,
different metric, right?
Totally different metric. But I get that, you see the guy with his muddy truck and he's like, man, I just drove out here and drove out there. But yeah, in the future, when you can remotely monitor and manage pads, how many can you do? Because then you become invaluable. This one guy can literally run, multiple operations in there. So this is fascinating. So you've got a class. When somebody takes your Udemy class, they're going to get obviously this framework, but then you go into details about each part of that.
Yep, each part. And not only that, how do you apply the framework to different segments of the oil and gas industry? So if you're in the upstream, well, how do you think about this framework if you're in the upstream? If you're in the midstream, how do you think about it? If you're in retail, how do you think about it? If you're a capital projects guy, in other words, your job is to build infrastructure, not to run it, but because as you know, in oil and gas, a huge amount of oil and gas's efforts goes into building new infrastructure year on year. How does this play out in a capital world? What does it look like if you're a product trader? Right? If you're on the overhead team in oil and gas, like you're in finance or supply chain, or you're in human capital, or you're in your world is changing too. How do you apply this framework if you are a financial officer, a CFO? What does it mean for you as the CFO in oil and gas? This is the reason why I wrote the book, is that what I found was too many people would zero in and paint this beautiful and a very alluring picture of what digital could look like in a segment of the industry, and they leave everybody else out like it doesn't matter. Well, no, it absolutely does matter. This is not I just have to pour digital into one part of my business and I'll be done. It's not going to work that way. You have to think about this in a very, very different context.
And I didn't mention your book before, but I think it Bits, Bytes, and Barrels, right?
Bits, Bytes, and Barrels, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that book, if they read that book, which is good, and then they took that course, that's a good combo.
It's a good 1-2 combination. Yeah. So what the book does is it tries to it's in 5 parts, 5 chapters, and it's set out to answer a handful of critical questions. So what is digital? What digital technologies really matter for oil and gas? Because there's lots, but which ones really matter? What is going to be the impact of digital when it gets into upstream, midstream, downstream, capital, finance? If you're a manager in oil and gas and someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, what are you doing about digital? or, hey, you need to be the guy who's going to lead digital in our company. How do you think about that? How do you approach it? How do you think about data? How do you think about change management? What do you need to do? The issues you're going to deal with. And the last chapter is aimed at boards. If you're a board member in oil and gas, and how should you think about this? Because without the board agreeing to allocate the capital to support a shift to digital, management won't take the lead here. And so it's really aimed at boards to think about the sort of the bigger picture. So you start with the book, and then when you go to the course, what I do is you hear my voice and go through as if you were in a classroom with me, where I'm walking you through all of these different elements. There's quizzes, and then most interestingly, I've built a little fictitious company who is 5 years behind the times, and your job as manager is to apply the concepts of the book and its insights as if you were the manager of that company, to develop its digital roadmap and game plan. So you come out the other end knowing how to apply this in this fictitious company, and hopefully you'll be able to relate that to your real job in your company or your role in your company.
And I'm talking right now to biz dev people at oil and gas services company right now who realize that their company may be worth, let's say today, let's say it's publicly traded, as you can tell, maybe worth half of revenue or 1x revenue. Yeah. They're looking at these, infrastructure software companies, that may be in the industry like my own Clean Connect, and going, wait, why is a software worth company that does these things, IoT and artificial, this kind of stuff, why is it worth 10 times revenue? And we're working really hard. That's not fair. I go generate $1 million and my company might be worth $1 million. These guys generate $1 million and their company's worth 10 million. That's not fair. Well, guess what? It is what it is. And there's a reason why. But you follow some of these things that Jeffrey's talking about, and you can transform your company and add more of these things. Your company value is going to go up. So there's one of the biggest motivations. When I look at it that way, Jeffrey, and I don't know what the normal price of your course is. I mean, I got it for like $39, but I'm thinking just one idea out of there applied is worth 100 times the cost of this thing. That's my opinion, and you didn't pay me to say that. But anyway, no, it's absolutely true, because I'm experiencing that. I'm seeing the frustration of some of these guys who've labored years and years and years and years in the services business, and yet some brand new startup, it could be worth more. And it's just, yep. And so this digital framework and the stuff that's in there is the kind of things that will help you get, more value for your company. And if you're talking to your employee or your consultant, add more value to your clients, right? Or to your employer.
And I should mention, in case someone out there is actually in a service company, there's a complete section in the book specifically aimed at service companies. And how do you apply this if you're a service company? And by the way, services companies have a much harder job than oil and gas companies in the land of digital. The oil and gas company, once you've discovered your reserve and you know where it is, it's just a question of getting the capital so that you can grind it out of the ground. Services companies, way harder. They're faster. They feel the effects of digital way faster than everybody. They have to be at the edge of innovation, or they can't survive now. And I specifically go into the book around as if I treat services companies at the same level of detail as upstream oil and gas, because it's that important. Oh yeah, it's that important. Yep, service companies should absolutely be buying the book and taking the course. It's aimed at them. In fact, the quiz is the assignment in the course is aimed at a fictitious company that sells a sensor device. And the question they have is, well, how do we sell this better into oil and gas? It's really aimed at a services company that sells a technology that has to compete now with innovation, digital innovation. How do you apply this framework to do that? So it's perfectly aimed at that audience.
So in the show notes, I'm going to put a link to your book and a link to the course and a link to your website, anything else. And Jeffrey's going to make sure I get the special magic links that give you the best value to all these things that you can't, So Anything last thing you want to say, Jeffrey, about like the opportunity? I mean, some people may be a little bit depressed because of the price of oil or this whole lockdown thing. But I know personally, I'm seeing more opportunity in this business than I've ever seen. I don't know what you think, but
completely agree. The pandemic, as nasty as it's been, coupled with this price war between OPEC and Russia, and the unconventional challenges in the United States, specifically the amount of capital it takes and the debt loads that those companies now have, that's a perfect storm to drive change. And for those companies that are now suddenly having to confront the fact that their employees can't work in an office without social distancing and are now working from home, are realizing, hey, digital actually is a solution to many of our problems. Many problems, and gives us an advantage. I'm not for those organizations that are sufficiently sophisticated management are not throttling back on digital right now. They're doubling down because they can see this is the way you create a gap between you and everybody else. So it's back to Moore's Law and Metcalfes Law. You bring those into this industry, and you're the first to do so. Your gap between you and your peers opens up incredibly quickly, and it just takes a few months, and suddenly you're so much further ahead. So I strongly encourage anybody in the industry right now. This is not the time to go, oh, well, this is toys for kids and science projects. Absolutely not. This is now the time. Now is the time to put your energies into this particular area.
Well, Jeffrey, I super appreciate you taking the time to meet with me and explain this digital framework. I find it fascinating. It's a great deal. I'm personally using it in my own business, and and I encourage everybody to check out these resources, which I'll put a link to in the show notes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh.